Late one stormy night, Mark, a seasoned animator and storyteller for a popular YouTube channel, found himself struggling with a creative block. Known for transforming everyday products into central characters of horror stories, his latest project was to feature an innocent can of Pringles. The idea was simple yet chilling. Every time a Pringle was popped from the can, a paranormal event would occur, weaving into a larger, terrifying narrative. However, the exact storyline eluded him until a mysterious package arrived at his doorstep. The package was a plain, somewhat tattered box with no return address. Inside, Mark found a single can of Pringles, its label smudged and the lid slightly ajar as if beckoning him to open it. Initially amused and considering it a timely inspiration, Mark set up his camera and decided to record the unboxing, thinking it might add an authentic touch to his video series. As the camera rolled, Mark popped the lid open. A foul, musty odor emanated from the can, causing him to recoil. Recovering from the initial disgust, he peered inside and saw that the chips were unusually dark, almost like they were covered in soot. Shrugging off the oddity, he attributed the chip's appearance to a factory error and decided it would add a unique element to his story. He reached for a chip, and as his fingers brushed against it, the room temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the cold air. Ignoring the chill, Mark popped the chip into his mouth. The taste was bizarrely metallic, not wholly unpleasant but unnerving. As he chewed, the lights flickered, and the camera static intensified, capturing distorted images he couldn't explain. Feeling a shiver run down his spine, Mark reached for another chip, driven by a mix of curiosity and the need to embellish his unfolding story. With each chip, increasingly strange occurrences began to unfold around him. The walls seemed to bleed shadows, and faint whispers filled the room, growing louder with each crunch. The camera captured fleeting glimpses of figures lurking just out of sight, their forms blurry and indistinct. Each occurrence was more disturbing than the last, feeding into Mark's horror narrative better than he could have hoped. Motivated by the bizarre events, Mark continued eating the chips, documenting his reactions and the paranormal activities. As the storm outside grew more violent, so did the manifestations around him. Books flew off shelves, and an eerie laughter echoed through the halls of his house, sending chills down his spine. Halfway through the can, Mark found a folded piece of paper wedged among the chips. Unfolding it, he read a cryptic note written in a rushed, almost panicked scribble: "Do not finish the can. Seal it back and bury it where no one will find it." The warning was unsigned, its urgency palpable. Laughing nervously, unsure whether to be amused or alarmed, Mark decided to use the note as a plot twist in his video. He joked about the warning on camera, his voice tinged with faux bravado. As he reached for another chip, the power in his house suddenly went out, plunging him into darkness. The camera, now running on battery, captured the sound of footsteps approaching from the darkness. Mark spun around, trying to locate the source with his flashlight. The light beam caught brief glimpses of something inhuman moving at the edge of his vision, too quick to be seen clearly, too terrifying to be fully comprehended. The whispers turned into harsh, guttural voices speaking a language he could not understand. Fear finally taking hold, Mark decided to heed the mysterious note's warning. He stopped eating the chips and attempted to reseal the can, his hands trembling. As he did, the unseen presences in the house grew more aggressive, shaking the walls and shattering windows with their unseen force. The camera flickered erratically, only capturing fragmented scenes of the chaos. With the can seemingly sealed, Mark grabbed it and his camera, fleeing the house to seek refuge. Driving away from his home, he glanced back to see dark figures watching him from the windows, their silhouettes stark against the lightning-lit interior. Mark drove through the night, the storm mirroring his turmoil. He aimed to put as much distance between himself and the house, the sealed can of Pringles beside him on the passenger seat. As he drove, he mulled over the note's instructions to bury the can, pondering the origins of its curse and the true nature of what he had unleashed. As dawn broke, Mark found himself on the outskirts of a small, desolate town, its emptiness echoing the hollow feeling of dread within him. He knew he needed to bury the can, to put an end to the horror, but a part of him also sensed that the story was far from over. The camera, still recording, captured his resolve to find answers, to delve deeper into the mystery of the haunted Pringles can. His journey into the unknown continued as Mark drove into the heart of the deserted town. The buildings were decrepit, the remnants of signage faded beyond legibility, the streets littered with the debris of abandonment. It was the perfect place to bury the cursed can, far from any unsuspecting soul who might stumble upon it. Yet, as he prepared to rid himself of the haunted object, his instincts screamed that there was more to be uncovered, more to the story he had unwittingly become a part of. Choosing a spot near an old, gnarled tree that looked as if it had witnessed centuries, Mark began to dig. The soil was unusually tough, resisting each shovel thrust with a stubbornness that seemed almost sentient. Sweat beaded on his brow, mixing with the light drizzle that began to fall, the weather reflecting the grim mood of his task. As he dug deeper, the whispers returned, this time clear and menacing, circling around him like vultures over a carcass. "Beware," they hissed, "the seal you break is not easily closed." Mark's hands shook, but determination fueled his actions. He needed to end this nightmare. With the hole finally deep enough, Mark placed the can inside, muttering a silent plea that this act might end the terror. As he filled the hole, a sudden chill enveloped him, the temperature dropping so swiftly that his breath became a cloud of vapor in the air. The ground beneath his feet trembled, a low rumble that escalated until the earth itself seemed to protest the burial of the can. Ignoring the ominous signs, Mark completed his task and stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. The ground where the can was buried pulsed slightly, like a heartbeat, then stilled. Relief washed over him momentarily, only to be replaced by a sinking realization that the story was far from over. His involvement had changed him, marked him in ways he couldn't yet understand. As he turned to leave, his eye caught something glinting in the mud, a small, metallic object partially buried. Curiosity overcame his fear, and he knelt to retrieve it. It was a medallion, ancient and ornate, with inscriptions that glowed faintly in the dim light. The moment his skin touched the cold metal, visions flashed before his eyes, visions of rituals, dark spirits, and a cycle of containment and release tied to the medallion and the Pringles can. Shaken, Mark pocketed the medallion, an uneasy feeling settling in his gut. He needed answers, and he knew just where to start looking. He headed back to his car, his resolve hardening. The town's library, old and likely filled with local history, would be his next stop. He needed to understand the connection between the medallion, the can, and the town. Upon entering the library, a musty smell greeted him, the scent of old books and forgotten stories. The librarian, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, watched him curiously. "Can I help you find anything?" she asked, her voice a whisper among the silence of the dusty shelves. Mark explained he was researching local history, particularly any legends or unusual events. The librarian's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition, or was it fear, passing through them? "Follow me," she said, leading him to a restricted section of the library, where the oldest records were kept under lock and key. She handed him a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn. "You might find what you're looking for in here," she said, her tone serious. "But be warned, some truths are better left undiscovered." Thanking her, Mark opened the book to a section marked with a yellowed bookmark. The pages were filled with tales of the town's founding, but one story caught his eye, a tale of a cursed object, buried beneath a tree, linked to a series of unexplainable disasters dating back centuries. The description of the object matched the Pringles can eerily well. As Mark read, the medallion in his pocket grew warm, almost hot. The whispers returned, now clear and urgent, "Find the key, break the cycle." He looked up from the book, his mind racing with the implications of his discovery. The librarian watched him, an unreadable expression on her face. Outside, the storm intensified, the wind howling as if in warning. Mark knew he had to act quickly. With the medallion as his guide and the cursed can buried, he had to find the key to unlock the cycle and put an end to the horror once and for all. As he set out from the library, the medallion pulled him towards an unknown destination, leading him deeper into the heart of the storm and the darkness that awaited. The medallion's warmth grew with each step Mark took, leading him through the desolate streets of the town towards an area even more forsaken. The buildings here were older, their once sturdy frames now succumbing to the relentless pressure of time and neglect. The sky darkened ominously, the clouds swirling as if stirred by an unseen hand, mirroring the turmoil churning within Mark. He found himself standing before an ancient church, its spire lost to time, its windows boarded up as if to keep out more than just the elements. The medallion pulsed fiercely, its heat searing against his skin through the fabric of his pocket, urging him forward. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, Mark entered the church. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a sense of suppressed dread that made the very atmosphere feel heavy, almost solid. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Mark could make out the faint outlines of pews lined up towards an altar that seemed untouched by the decay that gripped the rest of the town. The medallion guided him down the aisle, its pulsing beat like a heartbeat driving him deeper into the church. At the altar, he found a book similar in age to the one he had seen in the library but marked with strange symbols that shimmered faintly in the gloom. The book was open, as if waiting for him, its pages filled with cryptic drawings and writings in a language he couldn't understand but felt oddly familiar. The air around him grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder now, almost pleading. "Use the key," they urged. Realizing the medallion was the key they referred to, Mark hesitated. His rational mind screamed for caution, but the part of him driven by an insatiable need for answers urged him on. He removed the medallion from his pocket and placed it on the open page. The moment it touched the paper, the symbols began to glow with a fierce, blue light, and the ground beneath him trembled. The church was no longer empty. Shadows gathered in the corners, forming shapes that were human only in the loosest sense. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light as they crept closer, their movements silent but fraught with menace. Mark could feel their hatred, a palpable force that threatened to overwhelm him. Despite his fear, he was compelled to read the book as the medallion's light illuminated the text, translating the ancient words into images directly into his mind. He saw the town as it once was, vibrant and alive, then struck by a curse that brought calamity and despair. The cursed object, the can of Pringles, was but a vessel, chosen to contain a dark spirit banished from this very church centuries ago. The key, the medallion, was crafted to unlock the vessel and release the spirit, but only when the time was right to confront and banish it once more, this time forever. As the realization dawned on him, Mark understood what he had to do. The spirit had manipulated events to bring him here, to release it or to finally be destroyed. The shadows were nearly upon him now, their forms more distinct, more terrifying. They were the guardians of the curse, bound to protect the spirit until it could be freed. Mark felt the medallion burn against his flesh, its power growing as the moment of confrontation neared. With a deep, steadying breath, Mark lifted the medallion and placed it against his forehead, feeling its searing heat and strange power coursing through him. The church filled with a blinding light, and the shadows screamed in rage and fear as the battle between the ancient spirit and the will of one determined man began. Outside, the storm reached its peak, the winds howling like the cries of the damned, the rain falling like tears for what might come to pass. Inside the church, Mark stood alone, facing the darkness with nothing but a glowing medallion and a heart full of resolve. The confrontation was just beginning, the outcome uncertain, and the stakes higher than Mark could have ever imagined. As the light and shadows danced their deadly dance, the fate of more than just one soul hung in the balance, and the horror of what was unleashed was far from over. As the medallion blazed against Mark's forehead, the spectral figures converged on him, their forms blurring into a vortex of darkness. Their whispers morphed into a cacophonous roar, each syllable like a physical assault, battering against Mark's resolve. The church seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its walls groaning under the strain of the supernatural battle unfolding within. Amidst the chaos, Mark's mind was surprisingly clear, the medallion's heat a constant presence that kept him anchored to his purpose. He felt it not just as a physical object but as a conduit for centuries of conflict and containment, its power derived from countless rituals and sacrifices made to keep the dark spirit at bay. The shadows around him swirled faster, tightening like a noose. They were desperate, sensing the threat Mark posed with the medallion. He could see, in brief, horrifying flashes, the true form of the spirit contained within the Pringles can, a writhing, formless mass of darkness, its countless eyes burning with hatred and madness. It was an ancient thing, old when the world was young, banished here by those who had once understood how to deal with such entities. As the entity lashed out, trying to break the medallion's influence, Mark felt the toll on his body. The strain of containing such power was immense, his muscles tensed to breaking, his mind filled with the spirit's malevolent whispers. But amid the darkness, he found new strength in the echoes of those who had fought this battle before him, their knowledge and will reinforcing his own. Mark chanted the incantations that flowed into his mind from the medallion, each word resonating in the air with the power of truth and binding. The shadows recoiled with each syllable, their forms beginning to fracture as the ancient words imposed order on chaos. Outside, the storm peaked in ferocity, as if mirroring the battle within. Lightning flashed, each bolt a brilliant punctuation to Mark's declarations, thunder rolling like drums of war. The wind whipped through the broken windows of the church, scattering old leaves and dust, the air charged with static and the scent of ozone. Inside, the medallion's light reached a crescendo, a blinding pillar that seemed to pierce the heavens. The shadows screamed in agony, their forms dissolving under the assault of light. Yet the spirit fought back with dwindling malice, hurling dark energy that rocked the foundation of the church. Mark felt the battle tipping in his favor, but the victory was not yet assured. The spirit, though weakened, was cunning and ruthless. It shifted tactics, slipping past his defenses to invade his thoughts, dredging up fears and doubts to weaken his resolve. Mark staggered under the psychological assault, his focus waning. In that moment of weakness, the entity struck hard, a wave of darkness that felt like it could extinguish the light forever. But as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Mark's hand found the medallion again, its surface scorching yet comforting. He clung to it, the connection rekindling his faltering spirit. With a defiant cry, Mark redoubled his efforts, the medallion's light expanding to envelop him fully, shielding him from the darkness. He pushed forward, his voice joining in an ancient chorus of those who had stood where he now stood, their combined strength and will focusing through him. The entity recoiled, its form beginning to unravel as the medallion's power cleansed the church of its corrupt presence. The battle neared its climax, the outcome still hanging in the balance as the forces of light and dark collided with a force that shook the very air. As Mark stood firm, the medallion blazing like a star against the night, the spirit's resolve finally began to crack, its form disintegrating under the assault of light and sound. The shadows it had summoned vanished, screaming into the void from whence they came, leaving only Mark and the glowing medallion in the quiet aftermath. The church was silent now, the storm outside subsiding as quickly as it had arisen. Mark, exhausted but undefeated, looked around the scarred interior of the church, the medallion's light dimming to a gentle glow. He knew this was only a reprieve, a moment of calm in a larger storm that was far from over. The spirit was weakened, perhaps banished for now, but such darkness was never truly gone, only contained. As he caught his breath, ready to leave the church, Mark felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. The medallion was still in his possession, a powerful artifact that needed guarding. The battle was won, but the war against the darkness would continue, and he was now a soldier in that eternal conflict. With the medallion secure, Mark stepped out into the light of a new day, the town silent around him, its secrets buried deep. He was changed forever, a guardian of an ancient power he had only begun to understand. As Mark walked away from the church, the medallion warm against his chest, he knew the relative peace he felt was fragile. The darkness he had battled might lurk in the shadows, waiting for a chance to rise again. His life had become a vigil, a constant watch over the forces he had helped to bind. The town seemed to watch him leave, its empty streets a silent testament to the unseen war waged within its bounds. Mark felt the weight of unseen eyes, perhaps imaginations of his stressed mind, or maybe the remnants of the town's haunted past, acknowledging his victory, however temporary it might be. As he reached the outskirts of the town, the medallion pulsed softly, a reminder of its continued activity and purpose. The world beyond the town felt both vast and threatening, filled with unknown dangers and the potential for further encounters with the supernatural. Mark realized that his life had taken a new path, one that would lead him through dark places and darker secrets. He turned back once, looking at the town, its silhouette outlined against the rising sun. The church spire cast a long shadow, like a finger pointing ominously. It was a stark reminder of what lay behind and what might still lie ahead. Resolved to face whatever came, Mark set his sights on the nearest city, a place where he could research more about the medallion, the spirit, and other paranormal phenomena. He knew he needed to be prepared, to understand better the forces he was now sworn to guard against. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Mark felt a resolve forged in the fires of battle. As he walked, the land around him seemed to whisper, the wind carrying voices that were not entirely the wind's. The medallion grew warmer, as if affirming his thoughts, its presence a constant reminder of his new reality. Mark's journey was far from over, in many ways, it had just begun. The darkness he fought was but one of many that lurked in the hidden corners of the world, each waiting for its moment, each as dangerous as the one he had faced. His steps were firm, his eyes alert. The horizon stretched wide before him, its vastness both daunting and inviting. Mark knew that each step took him further into a world few knew existed, a world of shadows and light, of danger and duty. As he disappeared into the landscape, the sun climbing higher in the sky, the last echoes of the night's terrors whispered behind him, a chilling reminder that horror was never far away, always lurking, always waiting. And so, Mark walked on, into a day that held as much promise as peril, the story of his confrontation with the dark a harbinger of tales yet to be told. The horror was not over, it was merely out of sight, biding its time until it could emerge once more to challenge the light.